The night was quiet, too quiet. The stars above the small farming town twinkled like distant lanterns, but something felt off. A low hum broke the silence, growing louder by the second. Then, a streak of light tore across the sky, crashing into the dense forest just beyond Old Man Harris's farm. The ground shook, and the animals in the barn stirred nervously. Harris, a man in his late 60s with rough hands and a kind heart, stepped out of his farmhouse, clutching a flashlight. He squinted at the horizon, where a faint glow lingered. What in the world was that? He muttered to himself. Curiosity got the better of him, and he grabbed his coat and boots, heading toward the forest. The trees were thick, and the underbrush scratched at his legs as he pushed through. The smell of burnt metal filled the air, and the faint sound of crackling electricity guided him forward. Finally, he reached a small clearing. There, half buried in the dirt, was a strange, metallic object, a spacecraft, unlike anything he'd ever seen. Harris hesitated. His heart pounded in his chest, but something compelled him to move closer. As he approached, he noticed a figure lying motionless near the wreckage. It wasn't human. Its skin was a pale, shimmering blue, and its long, slender limbs were twisted awkwardly. The creature's chest rose and fell weakly, and its large, almond-shaped eyes flickered open, locking onto Harris. The alien's eyes widened in fear, and it tried to crawl away, but its injuries were too severe. Harris froze, unsure of what to do. He'd heard stories about aliens, dangerous, hostile beings from other worlds. But as he looked into the creature's eyes, he didn't see danger. He saw pain. "Easy now," Harris said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "I ain't gonna hurt ya." The alien flinched but stopped trying to move. Its breathing was shallow, and its body trembled. Harris knelt beside it, his flashlight casting strange shadows on the metallic wreckage. He didn't know what to do, but he couldn't just leave it there. "Let me help ya," he said, reaching out slowly. The alien recoiled at first, but as Harris's hand gently touched its arm, something extraordinary happened. A warm, golden glow spread from his fingertips, enveloping the alien's body. The creature gasped, its eyes widening in shock. The wounds on its body began to close, and its breathing steadied. Harris pulled his hand back, staring at it in disbelief. "What the?" The alien looked at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. It touched its own arm, where the wound had been, and then looked back at Harris. For the first time, its fear seemed to fade, replaced by something else, curiosity. Harris didn't understand what had just happened, but he knew one thing: this creature wasn't a threat. It was scared, alone, and in need of help. "All right," he said, standing up. "We gotta get ya outta here before someone else comes snoopin' around." The alien hesitated but eventually nodded, its movements slow and deliberate. Harris helped it to its feet, surprised by how light it felt. Together, they made their way back to the farmhouse, the alien leaning on Harris for support. As they reached the edge of the forest, Harris glanced back at the wreckage. The glow had faded, and the night was quiet once more. But he knew his life had changed forever. The farmhouse was small but cozy, with a warm fireplace and wooden furniture that had seen better days. Harris led the alien inside, guiding it to a worn-out couch. The creature looked around nervously, its large eyes taking in every detail. It had never seen anything like this, a human home, filled with strange objects and the faint smell of wood smoke and fresh bread. "You'll be safe here," Harris said, his voice calm and reassuring. "Just stay quiet, all right? Don't want anyone seeing ya." The alien nodded, though it wasn't entirely sure what Harris was saying. It understood his tone, though, kind and gentle, unlike anything it had ever experienced. Over the next few days, the alien stayed hidden in the farmhouse, watching Harris from the shadows. It observed how the old man went about his daily routine, feeding the chickens, tending to the crops, and fixing the broken fence. The alien noticed how Harris talked to his dog, a scruffy mutt named Buddy, as if the animal could understand him. It saw how Harris smiled when the sun rose and sighed when the work became too much. But what fascinated the alien the most was the way Harris interacted with other humans. One evening, a neighbor stopped by to drop off a basket of fresh eggs. The two men talked and laughed, their voices filled with warmth. The alien couldn't understand their words, but it could feel the emotions, joy, friendship, and something else it couldn't quite name. Later that night, as Harris sat by the fireplace, the alien finally gathered the courage to step out of the shadows. Harris looked up, surprised but not afraid. "Hey there," he said softly. "Feelin' better, are ya?" The alien tilted its head, studying Harris's face. It pointed to its own chest and then to Harris, as if asking a question. Harris chuckled. "You wanna know my name? It's Harris. Harris Thompson." The alien repeated the name slowly, its voice soft and melodic. "Harris." Harris's eyes widened. "Well, I'll be. You can talk." The alien shook its head, indicating that it could only mimic sounds. But it was a start. Over the next few days, the two began to communicate in their own way, through gestures, expressions, and the occasional word. The alien learned that Harris lived alone, his wife having passed away years ago. It saw the sadness in his eyes when he spoke of her, but also the love that still lingered. One evening, as Harris sat on the porch with Buddy by his side, the alien joined him. The old man smiled and patted the space beside him. The alien hesitated but eventually sat down, its long legs folded awkwardly. "You know," Harris said, staring at the stars, "I used to think I was all alone out here. But now, well, I reckon I was wrong." The alien looked at him, its eyes reflecting the starlight. It reached out slowly, placing its hand on Harris's arm. The same golden glow from before spread between them, but this time, it wasn't just healing, it was something deeper. Harris felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of connection he hadn't felt in years. He looked at the alien, his eyes moist. "You're something else, you know that?" The alien didn't understand the words, but it understood the feeling. For the first time, it felt something it had never felt before, belonging. The days turned into weeks, and the alien grew more comfortable around Harris. It still couldn't speak much, but it had learned a few words and gestures. Harris, in turn, had started to understand the alien's expressions and movements. They developed a silent language of their own, one that went beyond words. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Harris decided to ask the question that had been on his mind. "Where do you come from?" he asked, pointing to the sky. The alien looked at him, its eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out how to explain. It stood up and walked to the window, pointing at the stars. Then it drew a circle in the air, mimicking a planet. "Another world, huh?" Harris said, nodding. "Must be mighty far away." The alien nodded, then hesitated. It pointed to its chest and then to its head, shaking it slowly. Harris frowned, not understanding. "You don't like it there?" he guessed. The alien shook its head again, frustrated. It pointed to its chest, then to Harris, and then made a motion like a heart beating. "You feel something here?" Harris asked, placing a hand on his chest. The alien nodded vigorously, its eyes wide with urgency. It then pointed to the sky again and shook its head, indicating that its people didn't feel the same way. Harris leaned back in his chair, trying to piece it all together. "So, your folks don't feel things like we do? No love, no joy, no sadness?" The alien nodded, its expression somber. It then pointed to Harris and made the heart motion again, as if to say that humans were different. Harris sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Well, that's a mighty lonely way to live." The alien sat back down, its shoulders slumping. It looked at Harris, its eyes filled with something the old man couldn't quite place, longing, maybe, or regret. "Why'd you come here, then?" Harris asked gently. The alien hesitated, then pointed to its chest and made a motion like something breaking. It then pointed to Harris and mimicked the golden glow that happened when they touched. "You're broken?" Harris asked, confused. "And I fix ya?" The alien nodded, then shook its head, frustrated again. It pointed to the sky and made a sweeping motion, as if to indicate its entire world. Harris's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. "Your whole world is broken? And you think we can fix it?" The alien nodded, its expression hopeful. Harris sat in silence for a long time, staring into the fire. He didn't know what to say. The idea that humans, flawed, messy, emotional humans, could somehow save an entire alien species was almost too much to grasp. Before he could respond, a loud knock on the door made both of them jump. Harris stood up quickly, his heart racing. "Stay here," he whispered to the alien, motioning for it to hide. The alien slipped into the shadows as Harris opened the door. Standing on the porch were two men in black suits, their faces stern and unreadable. "Evening," one of them said, flashing a badge. "We're with the government. We've had reports of unusual activity in this area. Mind if we take a look around?" Harris's stomach dropped, but he forced a smile. "Unusual activity? Out here? Ain't nothin' unusual 'bout my farm." The men exchanged a glance. "We'll be the judge of that," the other man said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Harris's mind raced as the men began to search the house. He glanced at the shadows where the alien was hiding, praying it would stay out of sight. The two men in black suits moved through the farmhouse with precision, their eyes scanning every corner. Harris trailed behind them, his heart pounding. He tried to keep his voice steady as he spoke. "Like I said, there ain't nothin' unusual here. Just me and my dog, Buddy." One of the men glanced at him, his expression unreadable. "We've had reports of strange lights and sounds in this area. You sure you haven't seen anything out of the ordinary?" Harris shook his head, forcing a smile. "Nope. Just the usual farm stuff. You know how it is, wind in the trees, animals making noise at night. Nothin' to worry about." The men didn't seem convinced. They opened closets, peered under furniture, and even checked the attic. Harris's palms were sweating, but he kept his face calm. He glanced toward the shadows where the alien was hiding, praying it would stay still. Just as the men were about to leave, one of them stopped near the fireplace. He knelt down, examining the floor. Harris's stomach dropped when he realized what the man was looking at, a faint, shimmering mark on the wooden boards, left behind by the alien's glowing touch. "What's this?" the man asked, running his fingers over the mark. Harris hesitated, his mind racing. "Oh, that? Must have been something I spilled. Paint, maybe. I'm always fixin' things around here." The man stood up, his eyes narrowing. "Doesn't look like paint." Before Harris could respond, a loud bark came from outside. Buddy was at the door, wagging his tail and whining. "Your dog?" the other man asked. "Yeah, that's Buddy," Harris said, grateful for the distraction. "He's probably hungry. I should go feed him." The men exchanged a glance but didn't push further. "We'll take a look around the property," one of them said. "Make sure everything's in order." Harris nodded, his smile tight. "Sure thing. Just be careful around the chickens, they don't like strangers much." As the men stepped outside, Harris let out a quiet breath of relief. He waited until they were out of sight before turning to the shadows. "You all right?" he whispered. The alien stepped out, its eyes wide with fear. It pointed to the door, then to itself, as if asking if it was safe. "Not yet," Harris said. "They're still out there. We gotta be careful." The alien nodded, but its expression was troubled. It pointed to the shimmering mark on the floor, then to Harris, as if apologizing. "Don't worry about that," Harris said. "We'll figure something out." Just then, a loud cry came from outside. Harris rushed to the window and saw his neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, lying on the ground near the chicken coop. One of the men in black was kneeling beside her, trying to help her up. "Oh no," Harris muttered. He grabbed his coat and hurried outside, the alien following at a distance. "What happened?" Harris asked as he reached Mrs. Henderson. "She tripped," one of the men said. "Hit her head pretty hard." Mrs. Henderson groaned, her face pale. I'm fine," she insisted, though she clearly wasn't. Harris knelt beside her, his mind racing. He knew the alien could heal her, but it would mean risking exposure. He glanced back at the farmhouse, where the alien was hiding behind a tree. The alien met his gaze and nodded slowly, as if understanding the dilemma. Before Harris could stop it, the alien stepped out into the open, its shimmering blue skin catching the sunlight. The men in black froze, their eyes widening in shock. "What the?" one of them started to say, but the alien was already moving. It knelt beside Mrs. Henderson and placed its hand on her forehead. The familiar golden glow spread through her body, and her breathing steadied. The color returned to her face, and she blinked in confusion. What just happened?" she asked, sitting up. The men in black were already reaching for their radios, their voices urgent. "We've got a confirmed sighting. Send backup immediately." Harris grabbed the alien's arm, pulling it to its feet. "We gotta go. Now." The alien nodded, and the two of them ran toward the forest, the shouts of the men fading behind them. The forest was dense, the trees towering overhead like silent sentinels. Harris and the alien moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of leaves on the ground. Behind them, the shouts of the men in black grew louder, accompanied by the crackle of radios and the occasional bark of orders. "This way," Harris whispered, pulling the alien toward a narrow path he knew well. It led to an old hunting cabin, hidden deep in the woods. If they could reach it, they might have a chance to hide. The alien followed without hesitation, its movements graceful despite its fear. It glanced back occasionally, its large eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of pursuit. "Don't worry," Harris said, though he wasn't sure if the alien understood. "We'll lose them in the trees." But the hunters were relentless. They moved with military precision, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like knives. Harris could hear them getting closer, their voices sharp and urgent. "Spread out. They can't have gone far." Harris's heart pounded as he pushed forward, his legs burning with the effort. He wasn't as young as he used to be, and the adrenaline was starting to wear off. The alien seemed to sense his struggle and slowed down, placing a hand on his arm. The familiar golden glow spread through Harris's body, easing his fatigue and giving him a burst of energy. He looked at the alien, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thanks," he whispered. The alien nodded, its expression serious. It pointed ahead, urging him to keep moving. They reached a small stream, its waters glinting in the moonlight. Harris hesitated, knowing that crossing it would leave tracks, but they had no choice. He stepped into the cold water, the alien close behind him. As they reached the other side, a shout echoed through the trees. "Over here! I found footprints!" Harris cursed under his breath. "They're too close. We gotta move faster." The alien suddenly stopped, its head tilting as if listening to something. It pointed to the left, away from the path Harris had been following. "What is it?" Harris asked. The alien made a motion with its hands, mimicking something flying. Harris frowned, not understanding. Before he could ask again, the alien grabbed his arm and pulled him off the path, into the thick underbrush. They crouched behind a fallen tree, the alien's hand pressed against Harris's chest to keep him still. Seconds later, a drone buzzed overhead, its camera scanning the area. Harris held his breath, his heart pounding in his ears. The drone hovered for a moment, then moved on, disappearing into the trees. The alien let out a quiet breath and stood up, pulling Harris to his feet. It pointed in the direction it had indicated earlier, its expression urgent. "All right," Harris said, trusting the alien's instincts. "Lead the way." They moved quickly, the alien guiding them through the forest with an almost supernatural sense of direction. It seemed to know exactly where to go, avoiding obstacles and staying hidden in the shadows. Finally, they reached a small clearing. In the center was the old hunting cabin, its wooden walls weathered but still standing. Harris felt a surge of relief as they approached. "We'll be safe here," he said, pushing the door open. The inside of the cabin was dark and dusty, but it was dry and relatively warm. Harris lit a lantern, its soft glow filling the room. The alien looked around, its eyes wide with curiosity. "We'll rest here for a bit," Harris said, sitting down on a rickety chair. "But we can't stay long. They'll find us eventually." The alien nodded, its expression somber. It sat down across from Harris, its long legs folded awkwardly. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the weight of their situation sinking in. "You saved us back there," Harris said finally. "If it weren't for you, they'd have caught us for sure." The alien tilted its head, as if considering his words. Then it reached out and placed a hand on Harris's arm. The golden glow spread between them, warm and comforting. Harris smiled, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't felt in days. "You're something else, you know that?" The alien didn't respond, but its eyes softened, and for the first time, Harris thought he saw something like a smile on its face. The cabin was quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the lantern and the distant rustle of leaves outside. Harris sat on the floor, leaning against the wall, while the alien sat across from him, its long fingers tracing patterns in the dust. "You know," Harris said, breaking the silence, "I still don't know what to call ya. Can't keep callin' you the alien. You got a name?" The alien looked up, its large eyes reflecting the lantern light. It pointed to itself and made a series of sounds, soft, melodic tones that Harris couldn't begin to replicate. "Well, that's a mouthful," Harris said with a chuckle. "How about I just call you Blue? On account of your skin." The alien tilted its head, considering the name. Then it nodded, a small smile playing on its lips. "Blue it is," Harris said, grinning. For a while, they sat in comfortable silence, the tension of their escape slowly fading. But Harris couldn't shake the feeling that there was more Blue wasn't telling him. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Blue, I need to know, why are those men after you? What's so important that they'd chase you all the way out here?" Blue's smile faded, and it looked down at its hands. After a moment, it reached out and placed a hand on Harris's arm. The golden glow spread between them, but this time, it wasn't just warmth, it was something deeper. Images flooded Harris's mind, vivid and overwhelming. He saw a vast, barren world, its skies dark and its cities cold and lifeless. He saw Blue's people, their faces emotionless, their movements mechanical. He saw Blue itself, standing apart from the others, feeling things they couldn't understand, loneliness, curiosity, and a desperate longing for connection. Then he saw the moment Blue discovered the power of human emotions. It was like a spark in the darkness, a light that could heal not just bodies, but souls. Blue had come to Earth to find that light, to bring it back to its people before it was too late. The images faded, and Harris blinked, his mind reeling. He looked at Blue, his eyes wide with understanding. "Your people, they're dyin', ain't they?" he asked softly. Blue nodded, its expression filled with sorrow. It pointed to Harris, then to its own chest, and finally to the sky, as if to say, "You can save them." Harris leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just an old farmer, Blue. I don't know how I can help." Blue reached out again, its touch gentle but insistent. The golden glow returned, and this time, Harris felt something new, a sense of purpose, a belief that he could make a difference. "All right," Harris said finally, his voice steady. "I'll help ya. But we gotta figure out how to get you back to your world without those men catchin' us." Blue nodded, its eyes filled with gratitude. But before they could make a plan, a loud crash came from outside, followed by the sound of voices. "They're in there. Surround the cabin." Harris's heart sank. He stood up quickly, grabbing a rusty shovel that leaned against the wall. "Stay behind me," he said to Blue, his voice low. The door burst open, and the men in black stormed in, their guns drawn. Harris raised the shovel, his hands trembling but his resolve firm. "You ain't talking him," he said, his voice steady. One of the men stepped forward, his expression cold. "Step aside, old man. This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," Harris shot back. "You don't know what you're messin' with." Blue stepped forward, placing a hand on Harris's shoulder. It looked at the men, its eyes glowing with a strange, otherworldly light. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and the men hesitated, their confidence wavering. "Last chance," Harris said, gripping the shovel tighter. "Walk away." The men exchanged a glance, then raised their guns. But before they could fire, Blue raised its hands, and a blinding burst of golden light filled the room. The golden light filled the cabin, blinding and intense. Harris shielded his eyes, feeling the energy pulse through the air like a living thing. When the light faded, the men in black were on the ground, their weapons scattered and their bodies trembling. Harris stared in shock, his grip on the shovel loosening. What did you do?" Blue lowered its hands, its breathing heavy. The glow in its eyes dimmed, and it swayed slightly, as if the effort had drained it. It looked at Harris, its expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. One of the men groaned, struggling to sit up. You don't understand," he said, his voice weak. "That thing, it's dangerous. It doesn't belong here." Harris stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "You're the ones who don't understand. Blue ain't dangerous. It's here to help its people, and maybe even help us, if we let it." The man shook his head, his eyes filled with fear. "You're making a mistake." Before Harris could respond, more voices came from outside. Flashlights flickered through the windows, and the sound of footsteps grew louder. "We've got company," Harris muttered. He turned to Blue, his expression grim. "We gotta get out of here. Now." Blue nodded, but its movements were slow and unsteady. Harris grabbed its arm, pulling it toward the back door of the cabin. They slipped outside just as more men burst through the front, their shouts echoing through the night. The forest was alive with activity, the hunters spreading out in a wide net. Harris and Blue moved as quickly as they could, but Blue's strength was fading fast. "Hold on, Blue," Harris said, his voice tight with worry. "Just a little farther." They reached a small ravine, its sides steep and rocky. Harris hesitated, knowing they couldn't climb down in the dark. But the sound of approaching footsteps left them no choice. "We gotta jump," Harris said, his heart pounding. Blue looked at him, its eyes filled with trust. It nodded, and together, they leaped into the darkness. The fall was shorter than Harris expected, but the landing was rough. He hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of him. Blue landed beside him, its body glowing faintly as it absorbed the impact. "You all right?" Harris asked, struggling to his feet. Blue nodded, but its glow was dimmer now, and its movements were sluggish. Harris knew they couldn't keep running, Blue needed rest, and they needed a plan. He looked around, spotting a small cave hidden in the side of the ravine. "In there," he said, pointing. They crawled into the cave, its interior dark and damp. Harris lit a match, the tiny flame casting flickering shadows on the walls. He found a dry spot and helped Blue sit down, his hands trembling with worry. "You're runnin' out of juice, ain't ya?" he asked softly. Blue nodded, its eyes half closed. It reached out and placed a hand on Harris's arm, the golden glow faint but still warm. "Don't waste your energy on me," Harris said, pulling his arm away. "You need to save it for yourself." Blue shook its head, its expression firm. It pointed to Harris, then to its own chest, and finally to the sky. The message was clear: we're in this together. Harris sighed, his eyes moist. "You're something else, Blue. You know that?" Outside, the sound of voices grew louder. The hunters were closing in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Harris knew they were running out of time. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "If they want a fight, they're gonna get one." He grabbed a large rock, his hands trembling but his resolve firm. Blue watched him, its eyes filled with gratitude and something else, hope. The first hunter appeared at the mouth of the cave, his flashlight blinding. "They're in here," he shouted. Harris stepped forward, blocking the entrance. "You ain't talking him," he said, his voice strong. The man raised his gun, but before he could fire, Blue stood up, its body glowing with a fierce, golden light. It stepped beside Harris, its eyes blazing with determination. The hunters hesitated, their confidence wavering. For a moment, the forest was silent, the tension thick in the air. Then, with a burst of energy, Blue raised its hands, and the cave was filled with light. The golden light from Blue's body filled the cave, so bright that it forced the hunters to shield their eyes. Harris stood beside Blue, his heart pounding as he watched the scene unfold. The energy in the air was electric, crackling with power and intensity. "Stay back!" Harris shouted, his voice firm despite the fear in his chest. "You don't know what you're messin' with." The hunters hesitated, their weapons lowered but still gripped tightly. One of them, a tall man with a stern face, stepped forward. "Step aside, old man. This isn't your fight." "Like hell it ain't," Harris shot back. "You're the ones who don't understand. Blue ain't a threat. It's here to help its people, and maybe even help us, if you just listen." The man's expression hardened. "We have our orders. That thing doesn't belong here." Before Harris could respond, Blue stepped forward, its body glowing brighter than ever. It raised its hands, and the light intensified, forcing the hunters to step back. The air seemed to hum with energy, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. "What's it doing?" one of the hunters asked, his voice tinged with fear. Blue's eyes locked onto the tall man, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the light surged forward, enveloping the hunters in a warm, golden glow. Harris watched in awe as the men dropped their weapons, their expressions shifting from fear to confusion. The tall man fell to his knees, his hands trembling as he stared at Blue. What is this?" he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Blue stepped closer, its movements slow but deliberate. It placed a hand on the man's shoulder, and the glow spread through his body. The man's eyes widened as emotions flooded him: joy, sorrow, love, and a deep sense of connection. I can feel it," the man said, his voice breaking. "I can feel everything." The other hunters watched in stunned silence, their fear replaced by curiosity. Blue turned to them, its eyes filled with compassion. One by one, it touched them, sharing the power of human emotions. Harris stood back, his heart swelling with pride. He had always known Blue was special, but seeing it in action was something else entirely. When Blue was done, it turned to Harris, its glow dimming. It swayed slightly, its strength clearly fading. Harris rushed forward, catching it before it could fall. "You did it, Blue," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You showed M." Blue looked at him, its eyes soft and grateful. It pointed to the hunters, then to the sky, as if to say, "They understand now." The tall man stood up, his expression filled with awe. I don't know what to say. I've never felt anything like that before." Harris nodded, his own eyes moist. "That's what Blue's been trying to tell us. Humans, we've got something special. Something worth sharing. The man looked at Blue, his fear completely gone. "What do you need from us?" Blue pointed to the sky again, then to its chest. The message was clear: "I need to go home." The man nodded, his resolve firm. "We'll help you. Whatever it takes." The hunters worked quickly, their fear replaced by a sense of purpose. Using their equipment, they located Blue's crashed spacecraft deep in the forest. It was damaged but reparable, and with their combined efforts, they managed to restore enough of its systems for Blue to make the journey home. Harris stood by, watching as the final preparations were made. His heart was heavy, but he knew this was what Blue needed to do. The alien had come to Earth for a reason, and now it was time for it to return. Blue approached him, its movements slow but deliberate. It placed a hand on Harris's arm, the golden glow spreading between them one last time. "You're gonna be all right, Blue," Harris said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done what you came here to do. Your people, they're gonna be just fine." Blue nodded, its eyes filled with gratitude. It pointed to Harris, then to its chest, as if to say, "I'll never forget you." Harris smiled, though his eyes were moist. "I won't forget you either, Blue. You've changed my life in ways I can't even explain." The tall hunter, who had introduced himself as Agent Collins, stepped forward. "We've got the ship ready. It's not perfect, but it should get you home." Blue turned to him, its expression solemn. It placed a hand on Collins's shoulder, and the golden glow spread through him once more. Collins closed his eyes, savoring the warmth and connection. "Thank you," he said softly, "for showing us what we've been missing." Blue nodded, then turned to the other hunters, sharing a final moment of connection with each of them. When it was done, it stepped toward the spacecraft, its body glowing faintly in the dim light of dawn. Harris walked with it, his steps slow and reluctant. "You take care of yourself, Blue. And don't forget, humans ain't so bad after all." Blue paused at the entrance of the spacecraft, its eyes locking onto Harris's. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a final nod, Blue stepped inside, the door closing behind it. The hunters stepped back, their faces filled with awe as the spacecraft's engines hummed to life. A soft, golden light enveloped the ship, and with a gentle whoosh, it lifted off the ground, rising higher and higher into the sky. Harris watched until the spacecraft was just a tiny speck of light, disappearing among the stars. He felt a lump in his throat, but also a sense of peace. Blue had come into his life like a shooting star, brief but unforgettable. Collins walked over, standing beside him. "You did a good thing, Harris. You helped it when no one else would." Harris shook his head. "Nah, Blue helped me. It showed me what it means to really connect with someone, to care about them no matter how different they are." Collins nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe we all needed a reminder of that." As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Harris turned and walked back toward the farmhouse, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He knew life would go back to normal, but he also knew he'd never be the same. Blue had shown him the power of human touch, of compassion, and of connection. And that was a lesson he'd carry with him for the rest of his days.